makes me so fucking angry. That we're here talking about a piece of shit like Donald Trump.
I'm going to say one thing. Trump.
Robert De Niro didn't just make headlines, he lit a cultural fire. In an age where outrage is currency and every public moment is engineered for impact, few things feel truly unscripted. But what happened when De Niro took the mic that night wasn't calculated. It was volcanic. It was raw. And it was the kind of moment that doesn't just echo through newsrooms. It reverberates through a nation. No polished PR lines, no polite metaphors. Just a legendary actor, fed up, facing down one of the most controversial figures in modern American history and delivering a verbal strike that made the internet lose its collective mind. His words weren't a monologue. They were a warning, a reckoning. And the reaction? Exactly what you'd expect from the man he called out. Loud, defensive, and very, very public. But here's the thing. This wasn't just celebrity drama. This was something deeper. A clash of egos, yes, but also a confrontation between truth and spin, between legacy and illusion. So before you scroll, click away or move on. Stay with me, because what you're about to see isn't just another trending moment. It's a story with layers: power, pride, performance, and a grudge that refuses to die. This is more than a headline. This is the story behind the fury. And trust me, you'll want to watch this one to the very end. It started like any other industry event. A grand venue. Lights dimmed. People dressed to impress. The kind of night where actors usually talk about their latest roles, praise the magic of cinema, and thank agents with polished smiles. That's what the crowd expected, until a familiar figure stepped onto the stage with a look that said, "This isn't about movies tonight." The room quieted as he approached the mic. No teleprompter, no clever script, just intensity in his eyes and a voice that, moments later, would ignite a storm. At first, there was nothing unusual. A few opening remarks, the usual pleasantries. But then, without warning, the air shifted. "You think our democracy's safe?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. "It's at risk. It's being torn apart by someone who plays the villain better in real life than I ever did in a film." What followed wasn't just a speech, it was a public reckoning. Each word came like a punch, sharp, intentional, unfiltered. No metaphors, no sugarcoating. This wasn't coded language or political subtlety. It was pure, raw emotion. The kind of fury that builds over years and finally erupts in one explosive truth. He's a con artist, a fraud, a monster. People didn't know whether to clap, gasp, or simply stare. A few chuckled nervously, unsure if this was a performance or a breakdown. But as the seconds passed, one thing became clear. This wasn't acting. There was no character here. No stage persona, just a man, fed up and unafraid, saying what millions had whispered behind closed doors. And for many in that room and across the internet, it felt like a relief, like someone had finally broken the silence. The camera flashes intensified, phones came up, live streams started. Before the event was even over, snippets of the speech had already hit Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. And within minutes, the hashtags began to trend. You could almost hear the digital wildfire catching spark. But this wasn't just viral for being loud. It was viral because it struck a nerve, deep and undeniable. The kind of moment people feel more than they understand. Not just outrage, but validation, vindication. You see, for years, this public figure had represented something larger than himself. A voice of intensity, of command, of unfiltered emotion. And now, that same voice was being used not in a film, but against a real-world antagonist. And the timing? Impeccable. The stakes? Through the roof. As the camera cut to audience reactions, you could see the divide. Some smiling, nodding in agreement, others frozen, uncomfortable, like witnessing someone break the rules in a place where rules are everything. But that was the point. He wasn't there to follow rules. He was there to shatter them. And in doing so, he made headlines, memes, and moments, the kind that echo beyond the screen, because every era has its breaking point. And this was it. A mic drop that shook the room, then the world. Not with a script, but with truth. Raw, unscripted, and impossible to ignore. The moment those clips hit the internet, you could feel the atmosphere shift. Not just online, but everywhere. It was like someone had cracked open a pressure valve, and the steam was now hissing across every feed, every platform, every screen. And in the eye of that storm, one man. alone, fuming. If you know anything about him, you already know what happens next. He doesn't ignore insults. He doesn't reflect or stay above it or brush it off with class. That's not his playbook. Never has been. Instead, he grabs his phone, maybe still in his private suite, maybe sitting on one of those infamous gold Platones he loves so much, and does what he always does when wounded. He rants. Loud, messy, in all caps. The message hit Truth Social like a splash of gasoline on fire. Low IQ, Bobby. That's it. That's the counterstrike. It wasn't just weak, it was lazy, childish. Like the kind of thing you'd hear from a middle school hallway, not a former commander-in-chief. But it's more than just bad insult writing. It's revealing. This is a man who's built his entire career on being untouchable, on branding himself as a winner, a genius, a master of the game. And yet, when confronted by someone who won't play by his rules, someone who speaks with conviction instead of calculation, he cracks. Instantly. And it shows. Because while he was scrambling to come up with a nickname, the rest of the internet had already moved on. From laughing at the speech to laughing at his reaction. News sites pounced. Trump melts down over De Niro's speech. Trump's petty clapback goes viral for the wrong reasons. The coverage wasn't just everywhere. It was relentless. And it wasn't just headlines. It was TikTok edits, side-by-side clips, voiceovers with dramatic music, tweets with De Niro's quotes set against black and white footage like a movie trailer. He'd walked into a battle armed with schoolyard insults and ended up starring in a meme war he couldn't win. Even late-night hosts who are practically trained in Trump-fueled chaos couldn't resist. One described the meltdown as performance art. Another said Trump sounded like a man yelling at clouds if the clouds were Oscar winners. But what stung the most wasn't what people said. It was what they didn't say. No one took his response seriously, not even his allies. Some tried. A few MAGA influencers tweeted support. But the firepower just wasn't there, because the damage had already been done. See, De Niro's speech didn't just criticize Trump, it exposed him. It peeled back that golden, combed-over exterior and showed the raw, ego-driven nerve underneath. And Trump, in true form, did exactly what De Niro knew he would. He lashed out. Predictably. Desperately. And, worst of all, hilariously. Because when someone truly has power, they don't have to scream about it. They don't have to respond to every critic. They certainly don't need to validate a viral clip by turning it into a multi-day news cycle. But he did. He couldn't help it. For someone who's obsessed with controlling the narrative, he just handed the internet the story on a silver platter, and the timing couldn't be worse. Legal troubles stacking up, trials looming, allies distancing. And now another PR crisis, except this time it's one he manufactured himself. The internet, as always, responded the way it does best, with brutal creativity. One viral meme showed Trump's Truth Social post stamped over a crying baby's face. Another spliced De Niro's most iconic gangster lines over footage of Trump reacting in real time. "You talking to me?" played as Trump's eyes blinked in slow motion. And while all this unfolded, De Niro? Silent. No follow-up post. No angry rebuttal. Just silence. A silence that screamed confidence. Because he didn't need to fight back. He'd already won. The moment Trump pressed post, the roles flipped. He stopped being the leader of a political movement and became the punchline of a moment bigger than himself. It's a lesson that should have been learned by now. But somehow, he never gets it. In the age of the internet, when you rage, you lose. Especially when you rage against someone who isn't afraid to speak and has nothing to lose. There are moments that go viral, and then there are moments that stick. Not just because they're explosive or controversial, but because they touch something deeper. A pressure point, a truth no one wants to say out loud, until someone finally does. That's what made De Niro's speech different. It wasn't just famous words from a famous man. It was a break in the pattern, an interruption in the endless loop of headlines and hot takes. While others danced around the fire, he walked straight through it. Why did it hit so hard? Because this wasn't some out-of-touch celebrity spouting off for attention. This was a man who'd spent decades watching from the sidelines, saying little, choosing his words carefully. And when he finally spoke, he didn't pull punches. He unleashed them. But it goes even deeper than that. De Niro isn't just any actor. He's an institution, someone who's come to represent a certain kind of strength, grit, and authenticity. A cultural figure who, for millions, feels more real than the politicians they're told to trust. And in a time where public trust is at an all-time low, his voice doesn't just echo, it reverberates. This wasn't performative outrage. This was personal. You could hear it in the tone. The way his voice cracked ever so slightly, not from nerves, but from rage held in too long. The kind of fury that builds over years of watching a country twist itself into knots, trying to rationalize the irrational. And the timing? It was everything. With a new election looming, political tensions boiling, and the country more divided than ever, De Niro didn't deliver a message. He fired a flare into the sky. A warning. A line in the sand. He didn't just call Trump a threat. He called him a symptom of something even more dangerous. A system that stopped calling out wrong when it sees it. A culture that shrugs at lies, celebrates power for power's sake, and forgets that leadership is supposed to be earned, not branded. And that's why his words rattled so many. Because they weren't coded in political spin. They weren't designed for cable news segments or focus groups. They weren't meant to win anyone over. They were meant to wake people up. You think he'll give up power if he wins again? He already told you he won't. That line. That's the one that hung in the air like smoke. It wasn't said for shock value. It was said because it was true. And that's what made it land. Hard, fast, and unforgettable. For those who've supported Trump, it felt like an attack. But for others, those disillusioned, exhausted, afraid, it felt like someone had finally articulated what they'd been thinking for years. That this isn't normal. That it's never been. That the line between entertainment and governance has blurred so badly, people no longer know when they're being manipulated. And De Niro? He cut through that fog with a blade of honesty most public figures are too afraid to wield. He didn't do it for headlines. He didn't do it to trend. He did it because sometimes silence feels like complicity. And in that moment, he chose to be loud. His takedown wasn't polished. It wasn't rehearsed. That's what gave it power. It felt like a man talking to his country the way you talk to a friend who's about to make a terrible mistake. Direct, pained, urgent. And that urgency bled through every screen it touched. The internet didn't just share it, it carried it. From platform to platform, from captioned reels to stitched videos, people clipped their favorite lines, paused at the most emotional seconds, overlaid music, added subtitles, created TikTok dramas. It wasn't just viral, it became culture. And when something becomes culture, it lingers. It changes conversations. It makes people ask questions they were too tired or too afraid to ask before. That's why it mattered. Because De Niro didn't just criticize Trump. He challenged the system that allows him to thrive. He asked us to stop laughing nervously and start taking it seriously. He reminded us that democracy, real democracy, isn't guaranteed. It's fragile. And every time we ignore the red flags, every time we let power go unchecked, we're not just risking policy, we're risking everything. And in that moment, he wasn't just an actor on a stage. He was a citizen, a witness, a voice in the dark, calling others to pay attention. Not for drama, not for clicks, but because he believes deep down that if no one says it now, we may not get the chance to say it later. You'd think that after the chaos, after the headlines, after the memes and the meltdowns, it would be over. One man speaks his truth, another man rages in response, and then the internet moves on to its next viral obsession. But this isn't one of those stories. Not with these two. Because the man De Niro called out, he's not known for moving on. He doesn't let things go. He doesn't forget. And he certainly doesn't forgive. His grudges are legend, practically stitched into the fabric of his brand. He holds them like trophies, wears them like armor. And now De Niro's name is etched into that long list of enemies. Except this one feels different. This one stuck. Why? Because unlike most critics, De Niro didn't just question policy. He questioned character. He didn't aim at the campaign. He aimed at the soul. And in doing so, he didn't just make Trump mad. He made him look small. And that's unforgivable. So what happens next? We already know how this playbook goes. Trump won't stay silent. He can't. Whether it's on stage at a rally or buried inside an angry 2 a.m. post on Truth Social, he's going to hit back again and again and again. The content writes itself. Maybe he'll call De Niro a washed-up actor. Maybe he'll mispronounce his name, throw in a nickname that sounds like it came from a bad high school drama. Maybe he'll question his mental state, or his legacy. Whatever it is, it won't be new, but it will be loud. And that's the tragedy, isn't it? Because every time he responds, he gives more oxygen to the moment, more attention, more reach. He turns a fiery speech into a full-blown saga, one where he's not the hero, but the punchline. And on the other side of the ring, De Niro. Silent, calm, untouched. He's not scrambling to fight back. He's not chasing headlines or scrambling to correct the narrative. He doesn't need to, because everything that needed to be said, he already said it. On stage, in front of cameras, with the kind of conviction no one can fake. That's what sets him apart. In an age where everyone is reacting, posting, clapping back, he spoke once, and then he let the truth hang in the air like smoke, thick, heavy, impossible to ignore. But this isn't just a celebrity versus politician feud. It's bigger than that. This moment has become a case study in modern media warfare. A perfect storm of performance, platform, and perception. Trump's reaction wasn't just a tantrum. It was a reveal, a window into how deeply these criticisms sting. And for someone who built an empire on image, the cracks are showing. Not in the suits or the speeches, but in the way he can't stop responding. And the audience? They're watching. Not just for what's being said, but for what it reveals. Because here's the twist. The more he tries to diminish De Niro, the more he amplifies him. The more he rants, the more people rewind that speech. Share it. Talk about it. Meme it. In trying to win, he's only losing harder. And that's what makes this moment historic. Not because it's the first time a celebrity spoke out, but because it's one of the rare times someone said what needed to be said and refused to back down. Even under pressure. Even under fire. Even with the weight of an internet army ready to cancel, attack, dissect. De Niro didn't blink. And that courage, it struck a chord. It reminded people that speaking truth to power still matters, even when the power screams back louder than ever. Now, will Trump continue to attack? Probably. Will his supporters try to cancel De Niro? They already are. Boycott calls, rants, threats, the usual noise. But here's the thing. De Niro's not running for office. He's not auditioning for approval. He's not trying to please everyone. He said what millions have been thinking, and that's why it hit like thunder. In a time when silence feels safer, he chose to speak. And in a world where fear controls too much, he showed what it looks like to be unafraid. So what happens now? More reactions, more memes, more noise. But beneath it all, the message remains. Truth still matters. Courage still resonates. And sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the one that only had to speak once. So what do you think? Was this just another celebrity moment, or did Robert De Niro say out loud what millions have been thinking in silence? Did Trump's furious response reveal more than it covered up? I want to hear your voice. Drop a comment below, whether you agree, disagree, or just need to get something off your chest. Let's talk about the power of truth, the weight of words, and what it means when someone finally dares to call things by their name. And if this story made you pause, made you feel, made you think, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Because this channel isn't just about news. It's about the stories behind the stories. The moments that slip past the headlines, but stay in your mind long after the scroll ends. We've got more coming. More drama, more reckoning, more truth-telling. Whether it's whispered in the shadows or shouted from a stage. So stay tuned, stay sharp, and remember, the next story that changes everything, it might be closer than you think.